The carriage ride was a journey through the 7 circles of her own personal hell. Each turn of the wheels on the gravel road was a grinding reminder of her powerlessness, a rhythmic chant of her fate. Sold, sealed, delivered. Omega. Rosalind Vance stared out at the blur of the ancient forest, her hands clenched so tightly in the lap of her simple wool dress that her knuckles were white stones. She was not a bride on her way to a happy union. She was a treaty, a bargaining chip, a warm body to seal an alliance her father desperately needed. The Alpha King Callum Thorne of the Silvermoon Pack wanted to secure his northern border, the territory her own small, struggling Northridge pack clung to. Her father, Alpha Vance, had seen an opportunity not for his daughter's happiness, but for his own security. He had offered her up without a moment's hesitation, the discussion a mere formality that had not included her. The memory of his words still burned behind her eyes. "It is a great honor, Rosalind. You will be a queen. Do not bring shame upon this family with your sullenness." Honor. The word was ash in her mouth. What honor was there in being traded like a prize mare, her only value residing in a bloodline she had no control over? Her bloodline carried ancient magic, the ability to create protective wards that had faded from the Northridge line generations ago. But her father had conveniently failed to mention that she had never once shifted, that her wolf lay dormant and silent within her, a sleeping thing that had never answered her call. Her resentment was a cold, hard knot in her chest, a shield she had been forging for weeks. It was the only thing she truly owned anymore. The carriage finally broke through the dense woods, and the valley of the Silvermoon Pack opened up before them. It was breathtaking, a sprawling expanse of lush meadows and a glittering river that snaked around the base of a formidable mountain. Perched on a high cliff overlooking everything was the Citadel. It wasn't a castle of fairy tale whimsy, it was a fortress of dark, formidable stone, its towers scraping a sky that seemed grayer here, heavier. It was a perfect reflection of the man she imagined ruled it, hard, unyielding, and interested only in power. Her wolf, that dormant, silent thing, whimpered deep inside her. It was a sensation so faint she sometimes wondered if she imagined it, a ghost of an instinct that only ever surfaced in moments of profound fear. Now it was shivering. The carriage rumbled over a stone bridge and through the towering main gates, the sound of the portcullis groaning shut behind them, feeling like a coffin lid sealing her in. The courtyard was a flurry of activity. Guards in silver and black livery stood at rigid attention, their gazes sharp and assessing. Servants hurried back and forth. They were all so much larger, so much more confident than the members of her own pack. The sheer power in the air was suffocating, a physical pressure that made her want to shrink into herself. The carriage door was opened by a stern-faced beta who introduced himself as Gareth, the king's advisor. He didn't smile. His eyes, the color of slate, swept over her with a dispassionate appraisal that made her feel like livestock being inspected at market. "Omega Vance," he said, his voice a low rumble. "The king awaits you." She followed him on legs that felt like wood, up a seemingly endless flight of polished granite steps and into the great hall. The sheer scale of it was meant to intimidate, and it succeeded. Banners depicting a snarling silver wolf under a crescent moon hung from rafters so high they were lost in shadow. A massive fireplace, large enough to roast an ox, dominated one wall, but its hearth was cold and empty. And at the far end of the hall, on a throne carved from the heart of a single massive oak, sat Alpha King Callum Thorne. Every instinct she possessed screamed at her to bow her head, to bare her throat in submission. He was the embodiment of alpha power, a presence so immense it filled the cavernous hall and pressed down on her from all sides. He was larger than she'd imagined, with broad shoulders encased in a simple black tunic that did nothing to hide the cabled muscle beneath. His hair was the color of midnight, thick and just a little too long, falling over a brow creased in a perpetual frown. But it was his eyes that captured her. They were a startling, molten gold, the color of a wolf's eyes in the heat of a hunt, and they were fixed on her with an intensity that seemed to strip her bare. The moment her scent reached him, the sharp bite of mountain frost, wood smoke from ancient fires, and something wild, something uniquely him that called to a part of her she had long since buried. His entire body went rigid. His hands gripped the arms of the throne so tightly the ancient wood groaned and splintered beneath his fingers. Mine. The word roared through his mind, his wolf surging forward with such violent possessiveness that he had to lock every muscle to keep from shifting right there in front of his entire court. Mate. Fated. Mine. His wolf wanted to leap from the throne, throw her over his shoulder, and carry her away to mark and claim. The urge was so overwhelming, so primal, that his hands trembled with the effort of restraint. She was here. After 10 years of ruling alone, of bearing the crushing weight of unifying the fractious packs through bloody war, of maintaining a fragile peace with a council of conquered alphas who still held regional power, the moon goddess had finally granted him his other half. And she looked at him with eyes full of ice and fear. He rose from the throne in a single, fluid motion, forcing his wolf back down with an iron will that left him shaking. He didn't rush, yet each step seemed to devour the distance between them. He stopped a few feet from her, close enough that her scent wrapped around him like a living thing, making him dizzy, making his wolf purr even as it snarled its frustration. The air crackled with a tension so thick she could taste it on her tongue. Ozone and pine and something else. Something that made her dormant wolf flutter in response. A terrified moth beating its wings against her ribs. Rosalind Vance, he said, his voice deeper than she'd expected, a low baritone that resonated in her chest. It was not unkind, but it was absolute. The voice of a king struggling not to let his wolf's possessive growl leak through. She forced herself to meet his gaze, lifting her chin in a small act of defiance. The cold resentment was her armor. She would not let him see her fear. "Your Majesty," she replied, her voice tight and formal. A flicker of something, surprise, interest, pain, crossed his face before it was gone, his mask of stoic authority firmly back in place. "Don't frighten her. Don't claim her. Give her time. She hates you already." "Gareth will show you to your chambers," he managed, his voice strained. "We will dine together this evening." It was a command, not an invitation. He gave a curt nod, turned, and strode back to his throne before he did something catastrophic, like fall to his knees and beg her to see him. Really see him. His wolf howled in protest at the distance he was putting between them. Leaving her in the sudden, jarring silence of his wake, she felt the eyes of every guard, every servant on her, and her cheeks burned with a humiliation that was sharp and familiar. She was a spectacle, a possession on display. As Gareth led her away, she didn't look back. She would not give the Alpha King the satisfaction. She would be his queen, his treaty, his broodmare, but she would never, ever be his. Callum watched her go, his hands clenched into fists at his sides, claws threatening to break through his skin. The scent of her, wild heather and rain-soaked earth, clung to the air, and his wolf, the great silver beast that was the source of his power and his crown, paced restlessly within him, snarling and snapping. Mate. The word was a roar in his soul, a joyous, possessive declaration that had echoed the moment her carriage had entered his territory. He had felt her arrival like a shift in the planet's axis. And she hated him. He could feel it radiating from her in cold, bitter waves. He saw it in the defiant tilt of her chin, in the icy fury of her blue-gray eyes, in the rigid set of her shoulders. She looked at him not as her mate, but as her jailer. He sank back onto his throne, the wood seeming colder and harder than it had a moment before. Gareth approached, his face a carefully neutral mask, though his nostrils flared slightly at the scent of his alpha's barely controlled wolf. "She is spirited, Your Majesty." Callum let out a harsh breath that was half growl. "She has the look of a cornered wolf, Gareth. Her father did not just sell her to me, he broke something in her." His wolf growled in agreement, a low, threatening rumble that vibrated through his human form. The urge to hunt down Alpha Vance and tear the flesh from his bones was a primal, almost overwhelming need. To treat a mate so. To treat his mate so. It was an unforgivable crime. The council is already muttering, Gareth said, his voice dropping lower. They say she's only an omega, that her pack is weak. Elder Thane has been particularly vocal, reminding everyone of the strategic advantages of an alliance with the Sunstone Pack, the pack he led before you unified the territories. Callum's eyes narrowed, the gold within them flaring dangerously. Elder Thane can hold his tongue. The alliance with Sunstone would have come at the cost of my autonomy, and you know as well as I that he would use any leverage to fracture this peace and reclaim his former power. This arrangement secures the Northridge territories and their bloodline magic. Her ancestors could create wards, Gareth, protective barriers that kept rogues at bay. That magic has faded, gone dormant like her wolf, but it can be awakened. Without it, the northern border will continue to hemorrhage resources and lives. He used the language of strategy, the cold calculus of power that his council understood. He could not, would not, speak the truth aloud in these halls. He would not tell them that the moment he had seen the crude miniature portrait her father had sent, his wolf had stirred with interest, though he couldn't be certain until he saw her in person. He would not admit that he had spent the last month devouring every piece of information he could find about her, learning that she loved the histories of the old packs, that she preferred wildflowers to cultivated roses, that her mother, who had died years ago, had taught her the names of the constellations. He would not expose the raw, vulnerable heart of his fated bond to these political predators who represented the packs he'd conquered, who would see any weakness as an opportunity to reignite civil war. Love was a weakness they would seek to exploit. Duty was a shield. The arrangement is made, Callum said, his voice leaving no room for argument. She is here. She will be my Luna. Gareth bowed his head. Of course, Your Majesty. But the girl herself, she will not be easily won. Her walls are high. Callum's gaze drifted toward the archway through which she had disappeared. A strange, unfamiliar feeling settled in his chest. It wasn't the thrill of conquest or the satisfaction of a political victory. It was a deep, aching need to see her smile, to hear her laugh, to erase the haunted look from her eyes. His wolf wanted to claim and possess, but the man wanted to cherish and protect. Then I will lay siege to them, he whispered, more to himself than to his advisor. I have waited 10 years for her. I can wait a little longer for her to see me. He would court her not as a king claiming his prize, but as a male claiming his mate. He would be patient. He would be gentle. He would fight his wolf's possessive demands every single day. He would earn the trust her own family had so carelessly shattered, and he would raze to the ground anyone who dared to stand in his way. The chambers he had given her were fit for a queen, a suite of rooms with silk hangings, a plush ermine rug, and a balcony that offered a dizzying view of the entire valley. It felt like a gilded cage. Rosalind paced the length of the rug, the soft fur unable to soothe the frantic energy coursing through her. She had been bathed and dressed by a pair of maids who moved with a silent, unnerving efficiency, clothing her in a gown of deep sapphire silk that felt alien against her skin. It was another costume for another role she was being forced to play. She felt trapped, not just by the stone walls of the fortress, but by the overwhelming presence of the Alpha King. His scent seemed to have permeated the very air of the castle, a constant, low-level hum against her senses that made her skin prickle and her dormant wolf stir with a confusing mix of fear and something else, something that felt dangerously like recognition. A soft knock came at the door. One of the maids entered, carrying a small crystalline vase. In it was a simple bouquet of wildflowers, purple thistle, white yarrow, and the bright yellow of buttercups. They were the kind of flowers that grew wild in the meadows of Northridge, the kind her mother had loved, the kind she used to pick as a child. "From the king, my lady," the maid murmured, placing the vase on a small table near the window. Rosalind stared at them, her heart giving a painful thump. It was a trick, a calculated gesture designed to disarm her. He had done his research, learned some small, intimate detail to make her think he cared. Her anger flared, hot and protective. He would not use the memory of her mother against her. "Take them away," she said, her voice sharp. The maid looked startled. "My lady? I said take them away. I don't want them." She turned her back, refusing to look at the offending bouquet, refusing to acknowledge the way the sight of them made her chest ache with a loneliness so profound it threatened to pull her under. She heard the maid hesitate, then the soft clink of the vase being lifted and the quiet click of the door closing. Good. She would not be so easily manipulated. She would not fall for these cheap, sentimental ploys. But as she stood there, her arms wrapped around herself, the ghost of their earthy, familiar scent lingered in the air, a phantom touch of a home she would never see again. The loneliness was a physical ache, so sharp it stole her breath. In his chambers down the hall, Callum stood at the window, his wolf a snarling, pacing thing in his mind. He'd felt her rejection of the flowers like a slap, the bond between them thrumming with her anger and pain. His first gift, chosen so carefully, cast aside. His wolf wanted to go to her, to demand she accept them, to make her understand. But the man knew better. Patience. She needs time. Later, Gareth found him in the training yard, attacking a practice dummy with a savagery that sent splinters flying. "Majesty, you'll injure yourself." Callum spun, his eyes flashing gold. "I can barely control my wolf, Gareth. He wants to go to her, claim her, and she can't even stand the sight of wildflowers from me." He drove his fist into the dummy again, feeling bones crack and heal almost instantly. "Perhaps a different approach," Gareth suggested carefully. "The flowers were beautiful, but perhaps too personal too soon. She doesn't trust your intentions." Callum stopped, breathing hard. "Then what?" "Show her you see her, not her bloodline, not her purpose. Her." Dinner that evening was a silent, excruciating affair. They sat at opposite ends of a long, polished table in a private dining room. The food was exquisite, a roasted pheasant with glazed root vegetables, but it tasted like sawdust in her mouth. Callum watched her, his golden eyes missing nothing, tracking every breath she took, every shift of her body. She could feel his gaze on her, a tangible weight, and she focused all her energy on keeping her expression blank, her movements precise. She would give him nothing. His wolf whined at the distance, at her coldness. Even across the table, he could hear her heartbeat, smell her scent mixing with the food, and it was torture not to simply move closer. "You do not like the food?" he asked finally, his voice cutting through the oppressive silence. "It is fine, Your Majesty," she said, not looking up from her plate. "Callum," he corrected her gently. "My name is Callum." She didn't respond, merely took a small, deliberate sip of water. The silence stretched again, taut and uncomfortable. His fingers tightened on his goblet. "The flowers I sent," he began, his voice softer now, carefully controlled. "I am told you did not care for them. I apologize if I chose poorly." Rosalind's head snapped up, her control finally cracking. "You chose perfectly," she said, her voice dripping with a sarcasm she couldn't contain. "I'm sure your spies are very thorough. Did they also tell you my favorite color? Or the name of my childhood pet?" Callum's expression hardened slightly, a flicker of hurt in the depths of his golden eyes before it was masked by kingly composure. "There were no spies, Rosalind. I asked your father." Of course, her father. He would have given up any detail, any piece of her, to sweeten the deal. The man who told her she was worthless unless she was useful. The thought made her stomach churn. "Then you wasted your breath," she said coldly. "My preferences are of no consequence in this arrangement." She pushed her chair back, the legs scraping harshly against the stone floor. "If you will excuse me, Your Majesty, I am tired from my journey." Before he could reply, she turned and swept from the room, her heart hammering against her ribs. She didn't stop until she was back. Callum remained at the table long after she had gone, staring at her untouched plate. His wolf was snarling, not at her, but at the situation, at the father who had wounded her so deeply she couldn't even accept a kindness, at the centuries of royal protocol that prevented him from simply going to her, wrapping her in his arms, and telling her the simple, unvarnished truth. You are my mate. You are my world. Let me heal you. But she was not ready to hear that. She would see it as another manipulation, another line in the contract that bound her to him. Gareth entered the room, his presence quiet and unobtrusive. A difficult evening, Your Majesty? Callum ran a hand through his hair, a rare sign of his frustration. She sees a cage where I am trying to build a home. She sees a king where I want her to see a man. How do I show her, Gareth? How do I reach someone who has been taught that every kindness comes with a price? She has known nothing but betrayal from those who should have protected her, Gareth said wisely. Trust, for her, is not a gift to be given. It is a fortress to be earned, stone by stone. Callum looked towards the door she had disappeared through. The scent of her anger and her fear still lingered, a sharp counterpoint to the sweet heather he associated with her. Then I will bring the stones, he said, his voice raw with determination. I will build a bridge to her if I have to. Show her I see her, not the bloodline, not the alliance. Her. The next morning, there was no bouquet. Instead, propped on the table by the window, was a book. It was a slim volume, bound in worn blue leather. Rosalind approached it with suspicion, her heart already guarding against whatever manipulation this represented. It was Tales of the First Wolves, a collection of pack histories and legends she had adored as a child, that she'd read until the pages were soft and the spine cracked. A book her father would have considered a frivolous waste of time, one he'd thrown into the fire when he found her reading it instead of studying treaty negotiations. She opened the cover with trembling fingers. On the inside page, in a strong, masculine script, was a single, handwritten line. The strongest wolves are not those who are born with the loudest howl, but those who learn to listen to the quietest whisper. It was an obscure passage, one of her favorites, buried deep in the 3rd chapter. A line about the wisdom of the quiet Omegas who were the heart of the first packs, who listened and observed and held communities together. He hadn't just learned the title of a book she liked. He had read it. He had understood it. He had seen something in those words that made him think of her. Against her will, a strange warmth bloomed in her chest, unfurling like a flower in the sun. It was a terrifying, hopeful feeling, and she quickly tried to smother it, to rebuild her walls. But she didn't send the book away. She couldn't. She ran her fingers over the embossed leather, traced the words he'd written, and felt her shield of resentment feeling just a little bit lighter than it had the day before. The days that followed fell into a strange pattern. Callum did not press her for conversation at their shared meals, but he was always there, his presence a steady, quiet weight. She found herself watching him when she thought he wasn't looking, noticing small things. The way he listened intently when the castle steward spoke, giving the man his full attention as if his concerns mattered. The tired lines around his eyes at the end of a long day. The way he rubbed his temples when he thought no one was watching, as if the crown he wore was a physical weight. And every day there was a new gesture. Not grand, royal pronouncements, but small, thoughtful things that spoke of a startling attention to detail. One morning she found a shawl draped over her chair in the library, hand-knitted from the softest wool in the exact shade of twilight blue she loved, a color she'd once mentioned in passing to a maid. There was no note, but she knew it was from him. She'd been shivering in the drafty halls the day before, and he had noticed. She wrapped it around herself, and for the first time since arriving, felt warm. Another day, the castle kitchens produced a honey cake for breakfast, made from a Northridge recipe so specific, so particular to her mother's kitchen, that he must have gone to great lengths to acquire it. She took a bite, and tears sprang to her eyes, because it tasted exactly like home, like childhood, like her mother's hands shaping the dough. She looked up to find him watching her from across the breakfast table, his expression carefully neutral, but his eyes were soft, hopeful. She didn't thank him, couldn't force the words past the lump in her throat, but she finished the entire slice. And she saw the way his shoulders relaxed, the small smile that touched his lips before he looked away. He started leaving her notes, not with quotes from books, but simple observations. The hawk you are watching from your balcony is a redtail. She has a nest on the western cliffs. Or, I have asked the gardeners to plant moon blossoms beneath your window. Their scent is strongest after dusk. I thought you might enjoy them. Each note was a tiny thread, weaving a connection between them that she was increasingly powerless to resist. She started to notice things about him, too. She saw the way the younger pack members looked at him with a mixture of awe and genuine affection, not fear. She watched from her window as he spent an afternoon helping an Omega mother whose cart had broken, getting his hands dirty fixing the wheel while she wrangled her pups. She saw him in the training yard, sparring with his warriors, not as a king giving orders from afar, but as a brother in arms, fighting beside them, his movements powerful and precise, a deadly dance that made her breath catch in her throat, and her wolf stir with an interest she didn't want to acknowledge. He was not the cold tyrant she had imagined. He was powerful, yes, but he was also patient, observant, kind in ways that seemed to cost him nothing and yet meant everything. And he was burdened by a duty she was only just beginning to comprehend. The weight of holding together packs that had been at war, of maintaining a peace that was fragile and hard-won. One afternoon, seeking refuge from the suffocating confines of the castle and the confusing tangle of her own emotions, she wandered into the royal library. It was her favorite place in this fortress, a vast, circular room lined with towering shelves that smelled of old paper and leather and ink. Sunlight streamed through high windows, illuminating dust motes that danced in the air like tiny stars. She was running her fingers along the spine of a book of celestial maps, thinking of her mother, when his voice made her jump. Finding anything of interest? He was standing near the entrance, leaning against a bookshelf, watching her with an intensity that made her pulse quicken. He was dressed not in his formal royal tunics, but in simple leather breeches and a linen shirt, the neck open to reveal the strong column of his throat. He looked less like a king and more like a man, and somehow that was more dangerous. I didn't hear you come in, she stammered, feeling a blush creep up her neck, hating that he could still make her feel so off balance. My apologies, I did not mean to startle you. He pushed off the shelf and walked towards her, his steps silent on the thick rug. He stopped a respectful distance away, but the space between them still hummed with that undeniable energy. A magnetic pull that made her want to step closer, even as her mind screamed at her to retreat. This is one of the oldest sections, he said, gesturing to the shelves around them. Many of these texts were penned by the first alphas, after the Great Shift. Some are in languages that are almost forgotten now. His love for the history, for the knowledge held in this room, was evident in his voice, in the way his eyes lit up when he looked at the ancient spines. He wasn't just a warrior king, he was a scholar, a man who valued wisdom. I read Tales of the First Wolves, she admitted quietly, her gaze fixed on the book in her hands, unable to meet his eyes. The copy you left for me. A slow smile touched his lips, transforming his harsh features into something arrestingly handsome. It was the first time she had seen him truly smile, and it did strange, fluttering things to her insides, made her wolf perk up with interest. I hoped you might enjoy it. The passage you favor, the one about listening to the quietest whisper. It reminded me of you. Her heart skipped a beat. How so? You are quiet, Rosalind, he said, his golden eyes soft and serious, and she felt the weight of his gaze like a physical touch. But you are not silent. I see the way you observe everything, the way you notice the young Omega struggling with her pups, the way you watch the boarders from your balcony. You have a strength that does not need to announce itself with a roar. Your father may have taught you that your quietness was a weakness, but he was wrong. It is your greatest strength. His words struck a chord deep within her, touching a part of her that had felt invisible her entire life, a part that had been told over and over that she was insufficient, that her value was only in her usefulness. Her father had seen her quietness as a flaw, a failure to be the bold, commanding alpha daughter he'd wanted. Callum saw it as a strength, saw her in a way no one ever had. They stood in silence for a long moment, the air thick with unspoken things, with the weight of all the words they hadn't said. He took a half step closer, and her breath hitched. His scent was stronger now, pine and winter air, and something wild and uniquely him, and it made her feel dizzy, ungrounded, like the world had tilted on its axis. He slowly reached out, not to touch her, but to trace the title on the spine of the book she was holding, The Celestial Maps. His fingers brushed against hers, a fleeting contact that sent a jolt of pure heat straight through her, igniting every nerve ending. Her eyes flew to his. The gold in them was dark, intense, swirling with an emotion so powerful it felt like she was drowning in it, like she could see straight into his soul. His gaze dropped to her lips, and the world seemed to narrow to the space between them, to the inches that separated his mouth from hers. The air grew heavy and warm, charged with possibility. He was going to kiss her. And the most terrifying part was, she wanted him to. The rational part of her mind screamed the warning. This is a trick, a seduction, a means to an end. But the rest of her, the lonely, starved part of her that hadn't been touched with kindness in so long, leaned in, drawn to him like a moth to flame. Just as his head began to lower, just as she felt the whisper of his breath against her lips, the library doors swung open and Gareth entered, his face grim and urgent. "Your Majesty, the council has been convened. It is urgent." The moment shattered like glass. Callum straightened, the warmth in his eyes instantly replaced by the cool mask of the king. He looked from Gareth to Rosalind, his jaw tight with frustration, his hands clenching into fists at his sides. "Forgive me," he said, his voice once again the formal baritone of command. He turned and strode from the room without another word, Gareth falling into step behind him, already speaking in low, urgent tones. Rosalind was left standing in the sudden, echoing silence, her fingers trembling where he had touched them, her heart pounding a frantic, disappointed rhythm against her ribs. She pressed her hand to her chest, feeling the wild flutter there, and realized with a sinking horror that she was a fool. A complete and utter fool. She was letting herself fall for him, for his patient courtship and his pretty words, and the way he looked at her like she mattered. She was forgetting what she was, a political pawn. This moment, this near kiss, it meant nothing. It was just another strategic move in his campaign to win her compliance, to ensure she fulfilled her role, and she had almost fallen for it. The cold resentment she had worn as armor felt flimsy now, full of holes that his kindness had torn open. She had to rebuild it, stronger than before. She could not afford to feel. She could not afford to hope. Because hope, she knew, was the cruelest thing of all. Callum followed Gareth down the corridor, his wolf pacing a furious, frustrated circle in his mind, snarling its displeasure. He had been so close. He had seen the surrender in her eyes, felt her lean towards him, seen the slight parting of her lips. The bond between them had sung in that moment, a perfect, harmonious chord that had been brutally severed by his duty. His hands were shaking, claws threatening to break through his skin. "What is it, Gareth?" he growled, his anger making his voice sharp, dangerous. "The elders?" "Worse," Gareth said, his face grim. "A patrol was ambushed near the northern border. 3 warriors dead. It bears the marks of the rogue pack that's been plaguing the foothills. But the attack was coordinated, strategic. Someone is leading them, organizing them." Callum's blood ran cold. The rogues were usually disorganized, desperate outcasts. This was something new, something far more dangerous. A coordinated rogue army could tear apart the fragile peace. "And," he prompted, knowing there was more, feeling the weight of it in Gareth's hesitation. Gareth's voice dropped even lower. "The attack was on the edge of the Northridge lands. And there's more. The healers examined Lady Rosalind yesterday at the council's request, a standard protocol for a future Luna. She cannot shift, Callum. Her wolf is completely dormant. Elder Thane is already using both the attack and this revelation as proof that the alliance is weak, that your choice of mate has projected vulnerability, not strength. He's calling for an emergency council session. Now." Fury, hot and potent, surged through Callum. He slammed his fist against the stone wall, the impact echoing in the hallway, leaving a crack in the granite and bloodying his knuckles. The wounds healed almost instantly. He dares? He uses the death of my men to advance his own political agenda? And my mate's private struggles? He is stirring the council, Majesty. He argues that a wolfless Omega from a failing pack cannot be a strong Luna. He's bringing formal charges, demanding the betrothal be annulled before the mating ceremony. He has support. The words struck Callum like a physical blow. Annul the betrothal? Send her away? The thought was so abhorrent, so viscerally wrong, that his wolf roared in protest, clawing at the inside of his skin, demanding he shift and tear Elder Thane apart. He would sooner abdicate his throne, sooner let the kingdom fall into chaos than lose her. Never, he snarled, his eyes flashing a dangerous feral gold, his alpha power flooding the hallway and making Gareth take an involuntary step back. Summon the full council. Now. I will put an end to this insurrection once and for all. He would face them down. He would crush this dissent. But he knew, with a sinking feeling that made his chest ache, that he would have to do it their way. He would have to use their language, speak in terms of strategy and power. He could not stand before them and declare his love. He could not tell them she was his fated mate. They would see it as a fatal weakness, proof that his judgment was clouded by emotion, that he was unfit to rule. Elder Thane would use it to fracture the alliance, to reignite the civil war. He would have to be the king they expected, cold, calculating, and ruthless. He would have to defend his choice and his mate, using the cruel logic of strategy. And it would kill him to do it. Rosalind, unable to settle, her emotions a tangled mess of confusion and longing and fear, had decided to seek out Callum. She would tell him that she appreciated his gestures, but that they were unnecessary. She would perform her duties as his Luna, bear his heirs, and secure his treaty. She didn't need to be courted into it. It was a lie, a desperate attempt to protect her own heart before it was too late, but it was all she had. She was halfway to the council chambers, her steps silent in her soft slippers. Navigating the corridors she was only beginning to learn, when she heard voices from an antechamber, the door slightly ajar. It was Callum's deep baritone, tight with a controlled anger she hadn't heard before, and Gareth's lower, more measured tones. She froze, knowing she should not listen, that it was wrong, but unable to move, unable to make her feet carry her away. "They will not accept it, Gareth," Callum was saying, his voice raw with frustration. "They see her as a liability, a wolfless Omega. Elder Thane is pushing for annulment." "Then you must make them see her as an asset," Gareth replied calmly, his voice that of a seasoned advisor managing a crisis. "You cannot show them your heart in this, Callum. They will tear you apart. They are wolves who smell weakness, and they will exploit any vulnerability. You must speak their language. Strategy. Power. Give them no opening." There was a heavy pause, filled with a tension that radiated even through the thick oak door. Rosalind held her breath, her heart pounding so loudly she was certain they would hear it. Then came Callum's voice, colder than she had ever heard it, stripped of all the warmth and patience he had shown her, stripped of the softness that had been in his eyes in the library. It was the voice of the ruthless king she had first imagined, the voice of a man who saw people as pieces on a board. "Fine," he bit out, the words sharp as shattered glass. She was always the strategic choice. Her bloodline is old, one of the first. It carries the ward magic we desperately need to secure the Northern Territories. Her blood gives me a claim by marriage that no one can dispute, a connection to the ancient protections. She is a means to an end, Gareth. The perfect, quiet pawn to put my enemies in check. Is that strategic enough for them? The words hit her with the force of a physical blow, driving the air from her lungs. She staggered back from the door as if burned. She was always the strategic choice, a means to an end, the perfect, quiet pawn. Every fear she had, every doubt she had tried to suppress, every wall she had tried to tear down, came crashing back in a tidal wave of ice and pain. the wildflowers her mother loved, the book with the passage that had made her feel seen, the honey cake that tasted like home, the shawl that kept her warm, the almost kiss in the library, the way he'd looked at her like she was precious. It was all a lie. A meticulously crafted, brutally effective lie designed to secure her compliance. He wasn't laying siege to her walls to win her heart. He was dismantling her defenses to ensure she would fulfill her role, that she wouldn't fight him, that she would be the perfect little broodmare who produced heirs with the right bloodline. The warmth that had been blooming in her chest for weeks, the hope she had allowed herself to feel, was extinguished in an instant, replaced by an emptiness so vast and cold it threatened to swallow her whole. She was a fool, a naive, trusting fool who had mistaken a king's strategy for a man's affection. She backed away from the door, her movements clumsy, her vision blurring with tears she refused to let fall. Not here. Not where anyone could see. She didn't know how she made it back to her rooms. She moved like a ghost through the halls, seeing nothing, feeling nothing but the echo of his words playing over and over in her mind. Pawn. Strategic choice. Means to an end. She reached her chambers and shut the door, her carefully constructed world crumbling into dust around her. The shawl he had given her was draped over a chair. With a cry that was half sob, half snarl of pure rage, she snatched it up and threw it into the cold, empty fireplace. Then she took the worn, leather-bound book, the one she had treasured, and hurled it after the shawl. Every gift, every note, every small kindness, she gathered them all and destroyed them, tearing and throwing and breaking until her room looked like a battlefield. She sank to the floor among the wreckage, wrapping her arms around her knees, and for the first time since arriving at the fortress, she let the tears come. But they were not tears of sadness or self-pity. They were tears of pure, unadulterated rage. Rage at her father for selling her like cattle. Rage at Callum for deceiving her so completely. But most of all, rage at herself for daring to hope, for believing that she could be anything more than what her father had always told her she was. A useful tool, a strategic asset, a pawn. The shield of resentment she had tried to rebuild was no longer needed. It had been replaced by a wall of solid ice, impenetrable and absolute. From this moment on, King Callum Thorne would get exactly what he wanted. The perfect, quiet, and utterly empty pawn. But he would never, ever touch her heart again. The change in her was immediate and absolute. Rosalind became the model of a future Luna, a perfect porcelain doll. She was polite, graceful, and utterly remote. She attended meals, sat through council meetings when required, and managed the household staff with a cool efficiency that left no room for complaint. Her responses were perfect, her manners impeccable, her posture regal. But the light in her eyes was gone, extinguished like a candle flame. She never met Callum's gaze. When he spoke to her, she would answer with a detached courtesy that was more insulting than any outburst, her voice flat and emotionless. Yes, Your Majesty. Of course, Your Majesty. As you wish, Your Majesty. She was a ghost in his palace, a beautiful, empty vessel who performed her duties flawlessly while her soul remained 1,000 miles away, locked behind walls of ice he couldn't breach. For Callum, it was a special kind of torture, worse than any battle wound, worse than any political defeat. The bond between them, the invisible thread that connected his soul to hers, was now a source of constant, grating pain. He could feel her emotional withdrawal as a physical coldness, a constant ache in his chest that made it hard to breathe. His wolf, which had been soothed by her presence even when she was distant, was now a frantic, snarling beast, clawing at him from the inside, howling its distress, demanding he fix what was broken. But he didn't know what was broken. He replayed every interaction in his mind, searching desperately for his misstep. Was it the interrupted kiss? Had he been too forward? Had he pushed too hard, moved too fast? Had he offended her in some way he couldn't comprehend? The not knowing was driving him mad. He tried to speak to her, to draw her out, to find even a glimmer of the woman who had started to soften towards him, but it was like talking to a stone wall. "Rosalind, what is wrong?" he would ask, his voice laced with a desperation he could no longer hide, his alpha control fraying at the edges. "Nothing is wrong, Your Majesty," she would reply, her voice devoid of all emotion, her eyes focused somewhere past his shoulder. "Is there something you require of me?" The formal title, Your Majesty, was a blade she twisted in his gut with every utterance, a deliberate reminder of the distance between them. He sent her gifts, a rare pearl necklace that had belonged to his mother, a finely trained falcon, but they were always returned unopened, left on the table outside her door like refuse. He tried leaving notes again, pouring his confusion and his longing onto paper, but they remained where he left them, untouched, unread, eventually disappearing into the fire she kept burning in her chambers. The silence between them grew, a vast, echoing chasm filled with his confusion and her pain, and he felt like he was losing his mind. Weeks passed. The northern border grew more volatile, rogue attacks increasing. The council grew more restless, Elder Thane's whispers of discontent spreading. And the distance between Callum and Rosalind became an icy wasteland that was killing him slowly. He found himself unable to sleep, pacing his chambers at night, his wolf too agitated to rest. The scent of her from her rooms down the hall was a constant, tormenting reminder of what he was losing, of the mate who was slipping through his fingers. He felt like he was losing his mind. His control, the iron discipline that had defined his entire reign, was fraying at the edges. He snapped at his advisors, made reckless decisions in council, couldn't focus on reports or strategies. Gareth watched him with growing concern. "Majesty, you need to rest. You're pushing yourself too hard." "I can't," Callum snarled, his eyes wild. "Every time I close my eyes, I see her. I feel her pain through the bond, and I don't know why. What did I do, Gareth? What did I do to make her hate me?" Gareth suggested investigating, and Callum seized on it desperately. Week 1. Gareth reported that she'd spoken to no one, but had been seen near the council wing the day before the change. Week 2. Callum realized it was the same day as his confrontation with Elder Thane, the day he'd had to defend his choice in strategic terms. He asked Gareth to recount every word said that day, searching for anything that might have reached her ears. Week 3. A servant finally came forward, guilt-ridden. "Your Majesty, I saw the lady near the council chamber that day. She was standing outside the door, and when she left, she was crying." The truth crashed over Callum like a wave of ice water. She had heard him. She had heard him reduce her to strategy, call her a pawn. Oh gods, she thought. She believed. His wolf roared in anguish, and he partially shifted, unable to control it. His eyes went fully gold, claws extended, fangs dropped. He punched the stone wall with such force that his hand shattered, bones breaking through skin. They healed almost instantly, but the pain was nothing compared to the agony in his chest. "She thinks I don't care," he choked out. "She thinks she's nothing to me. She thinks it was all a lie." Gareth gripped his shoulder. "Then you tell her the truth. You make her listen." "She won't. She won't even look at me." One evening, driven by desperation and his wolf's frantic demands, he found her on her balcony, staring out at the rising moon. She was wrapped in a simple cloak, a solitary figure outlined against the twilight sky, and the sight of her, so close yet so impossibly far, was the final straw. His patience, his control, his careful strategy, it all shattered. He strode onto the balcony, his steps heavy with a frustration that bordered on fury, his wolf surging so close to the surface that his eyes were glowing gold in the dim light. She didn't turn, didn't acknowledge him in any way, and that indifference, that complete dismissal, ignited something primal in him. "Enough," he growled, the sound a low, dangerous rumble that was more wolf than man. She finally turned to look at him, her expression as cold and remote as the moon above them, and that icy composure when he was dying inside made his control snap completely. "Your Majesty," she said, her voice utterly flat. "Do not call me that," he snarled, taking a step closer. His alpha presence flaring around him not to command her, but in a desperate instinctual attempt to get any reaction at all, to break through that frozen shell and reach the woman beneath. My name is Callum, and you will tell me what I have done. You will tell me why you look at me as if I am a stranger, as if I am your enemy." Rosalind's mask of indifference finally cracked, just slightly. A bitter, humorless smile touched her lips. "A stranger? No. I see you quite clearly now, Your Majesty. I see the king who bought himself a bride to secure his borders. I see exactly what I am to you." The accusation, so close to the strategic lies he had been forced to tell his council, struck him like a physical blow, like a knife to the heart. "That is not," he began, but she cut him off, her voice rising with the force of weeks of suppressed anguish, all the pain and rage she'd been holding inside finally exploding. "Is it not? Did you think I was so naive, so stupid? Did you think your little gifts and pretty words would blind me to the truth of what I am to you? I heard you, Callum. I heard every word." "The truth?" he demanded, his own anger rising to meet hers, his wolf snarling. "You know nothing of the truth." "Oh, I know the truth," she cried, her voice breaking, and he saw tears shimmering in her eyes for the first time. She took a step towards him, her small frame vibrating with fury, her eyes blazing with a fire he hadn't seen since the day she arrived, and it was a terrible, beautiful sight. "I heard you. I heard you with Gareth. I heard the great Alpha King describing his brilliant plan to his advisor." Callum stared at her, his mind racing, trying to place the moment, and then it clicked. The antechamber, the conversation about the council, Elder Thane's demands. Oh no. Oh gods, no. A cold dread washed over him as he realized what she must have heard, the context she must have missed. "Rosalind, you don't understand. I understand perfectly," she shot back, her voice cracking with emotion, jabbing a finger at his chest. "I understand that she was always the strategic choice. I understand that I am a means to an end, and I understand that I am your perfect, quiet pawn. Your words, King Callum, not mine. Those were your words." Her voice cracked on the last word, and the fury in her eyes was suddenly awash with a pain so profound, so devastating, that it ripped through him like a physical wound. The bond between them carried the full, crushing force of her heartbreak directly into his soul, and it was worse than any injury he had ever sustained in battle. It was the pain of betrayal, of shattered trust, of hope destroyed. He saw it all in a sickening flash of clarity. Her tentative softening, his calculated words meant for the council, her devastated realization that she meant nothing. He had been trying to protect her from the vipers on his council, and in doing so, he had become the very monster she feared him to be. "No," he whispered, the single word a raw, desperate plea. He reached for her, his hand trembling. "Rosalind, that was not for you. That was for them. I had to—" She flinched away from his touch as if burned, as if his hand were a brand. "Do not lie to me any more. I am tired of the lies, tired of the manipulation. You have what you wanted. You have your pawn. You have your strategic alliance. Now leave me alone." She turned to sweep past him, back into the cold safety of her room where she could rebuild her walls and pretend her heart wasn't shattering all over again. But his wolf, his very soul, would not allow it. Not now. Not when he finally understood what he'd done, what she believed. Not when she thought he didn't love her. His control snapped completely. In one swift movement, he grabbed her arm. It wasn't a brutal grip, but it was unyielding, the strength of an alpha king who would not be denied, who would make her hear the truth if it was the last thing he did. Her eyes widened in shock and a flicker of fear. "Let go of me," she gasped, trying to pull away. "No," he said, his voice a low, ragged growl that was more wolf than man, his eyes blazing with gold fire. "My wolf will never let you go. You are my mate, my other half, and you will hear the truth. All of it." Ignoring her struggles, ignoring her protests, he began to pull her from the balcony, back through her chambers, and out into the corridor. "Where are you taking me?" she cried, twisting in his grip, her heart pounding with confusion and anger and something else, something that felt almost like hope. "You wanted the truth?" he snarled, his face a mask of thunderous determination. "You're going to get it. From the man who was there. From Gareth himself." He didn't slow his pace. He dragged her through the winding stone hallways of the castle, his long strides forcing her into a half-run to keep up. Guards and servants flattened themselves against the walls, their eyes wide with shock and fear at the sight of their king, his face a mask of fury and desperation, his eyes glowing wolf gold, pulling their silent, withdrawn future Luna behind him. He didn't care. Nothing mattered but this. Nothing mattered but making her understand. He kicked open the door to Gareth's study without knocking, the heavy wood slamming against the stone wall. The advisor, who had been poring over maps on his desk, shot to his feet, his eyes widening at the scene before him. "Your Majesty?" Callum didn't release Rosalind. He pulled her into the center of the room, his grip on her arm the only thing keeping her upright as her legs threatened to give out. He turned her to face his advisor, his other hand coming up to cup her jaw gently, forcing her to look at him. His touch was surprisingly gentle despite his fury, his thumb stroking her cheekbone, wiping away a tear she hadn't realized had fallen. "Tell her," Callum commanded, his voice hoarse with emotion, raw and desperate. "Tell her everything. Tell her what Elder Thane and the council said. Tell her what they called her. Tell her what they demanded." Gareth looked from his king's desperate, anguished face to Rosalind's confused and defiant one, and understanding dawned. He bowed his head slightly, his expression grave. "My lady," he began, his voice solemn and measured. "The council was displeased with the king's choice of mate, greatly displeased. They called you unsuitable, a weak omega from a failing pack. Wolfless, they said, and therefore worthless. They said you were a liability that would invite attack, that would make us appear weak to our enemies." Rosalind flinched, each word a fresh sting, a confirmation of her worst fears about what they thought of her. This was no better. It was just another kind of insult. "So he defended his strategic choice," she spat, trying to pull away from Callum's grasp, her voice bitter. "No," Gareth said firmly, his voice ringing with conviction, meeting her gaze directly. "He defended you, my lady. They demanded he annul the betrothal. Elder Thane, who still holds considerable power among the conquered packs, insisted the king cast you aside and forge an alliance with a more powerful pack, one that would solidify his rule. The council threatened to fracture the alliance, to withdraw their support. They used the rogue attacks, your inability to shift, every weakness they could find. They wanted you gone, and the king refused." Callum's grip on her arm tightened possessively, his other hand still cradling her face, as if she were the most precious thing in the world. "Tell her what I told you, Gareth," he ordered, his voice thick with emotion. "Tell her why I said those things." Gareth took a deep breath, his gaze never leaving Rosalind's. "The king knew the council would not understand the truth of the heart, my lady. They are politicians and warriors. They see emotion as weakness, as a liability to be exploited. They only understand the language of power and strategy. He could not tell them that he chose you because his soul recognized yours. He could not tell them that he was falling in love with you, that you were his fated mate, because if he had, they would have used it against him," Rosalind whispered, the pieces finally clicking into place. "They would have seen it as a weakness," Gareth confirmed. "They would have used his love for you as leverage, as a weapon to control him. Elder Thane would have threatened you to control the king. So he used their language against them. He built a logical case they could not refute. He spoke of your ancient bloodline not because it's all you are, but because it was a weapon to silence them, to give them a reason they could accept. He called you a strategic choice, because he refused to stand before those vipers and admit he loved you. He was protecting you, my lady. And he was protecting his heart from them." The room fell silent. The only sound was Rosalind's ragged breathing as the truth crashed over her in waves. The words circled in her head, rewriting everything she thought she knew. He refused to admit he loved you. He was protecting you. It was too much. It was a truth too vast and terrifying to comprehend. She looked up at Callum, really looked at him for the first time in weeks. The fury was gone from his eyes, replaced by a raw, desperate vulnerability that mirrored the ache in her own chest. He looked like a man who had laid his entire soul bare, who was waiting for the killing blow, who would accept whatever judgment she passed. And in that moment, the ice around her heart didn't just crack. It shattered completely. The pain of weeks, the betrayal, the misunderstanding, it was all eclipsed by a lifetime of another, deeper wound, one she'd been carrying since childhood. The truth came tumbling out of her, a broken, whispered confession she'd never spoken aloud. "My father," she choked out, tears blurring her vision, her voice small and broken. He always taught me my worth was in my usefulness. I was a good daughter if I was obedient. I was valuable if I could secure an alliance. I was never just chosen. I was only ever useful. A tool, a bargaining chip. Never just loved for being me. The dam broke. A sob tore from her throat, a raw, ragged sound of a pain so old and so deep she had forgotten its source. Her legs gave way, and she would have collapsed if Callum hadn't been holding her. He let go of her arm only to wrap both of his around her, catching her, pulling her tight against his chest. He sank to his knees with her, holding her as she wept, as weeks of pain and years of wounds poured out of her. She buried her face in his tunic, and he held her like she was the most precious, fragile thing in the universe, his large body a shield against the world. "You are not useful," he murmured into her hair, his voice thick with an emotion that was fierce and tender all at once, his own eyes burning with unshed tears. "You are everything." He tilted her chin up with gentle fingers, forcing her to meet his gaze. His golden eyes blazed with a sincerity that left no room for doubt, with a love so profound it took her breath away. "Listen to me, Rosalind. I choose you. Not your bloodline, not your territory, not your usefulness. You. Just you. I chose you from the first moment I saw your portrait and my wolf stirred. I chose you when you arrived, and my wolf recognized you as mate. I have spent every day since trying to show you, in the only ways I knew how, that you were more than a treaty. You are my mate, my other half. I choose you before the moon goddess and before all witnesses. I choose you." He gently wiped a tear from her cheek with his thumb, his touch infinitely tender. "Your father was a fool. You were never a pawn. You were always a queen. You just needed someone to see it." She looked into his eyes, into the depths of his soul laid bare before her, and she finally saw the truth she had been too afraid to believe. It was not a lie. It was not a strategy. It was love. A fierce, protective, and utterly devoted love that had been there all along, hidden behind the language of war, because that was the only way he could protect it. And with a final, shuddering breath, feeling like she was finally coming home, she leaned forward and pressed her lips to his. The kiss was not the tentative exploration of the library, the one that had been interrupted. It was a collision of desperate souls, a sealing of a bond that had been tested by fire and lies and misunderstanding. It was salt and sorrow and a soaring, brilliant hope. It was a promise and a vow and a beginning. It was everything. When they finally broke apart, breathless and trembling, they were still kneeling on the floor of Gareth's study. Gareth himself had slipped out at some point, giving them the privacy they so desperately needed, closing the door quietly behind him. Callum rested his forehead against hers, their breath mingling in the quiet space between them, his hands cradling her face like she was made of starlight. "I am so sorry," he whispered, his voice raw and broken. "I should have told you. I should have trusted you with the truth of my heart from the beginning. I should have found a way." "And I should have trusted you," she whispered back, her hand coming up to cup his cheek, feeling the faint rasp of his stubble, the warmth of his skin, grounding herself in the reality of him. I let my past blind me. I heard what I expected to hear because I've been taught my whole life that I'm not worthy of being chosen for myself. For the first time in weeks, her dormant wolf stirred within her, not with fear or confusion, but with a gentle, purring warmth. It recognized the truth in him, the safety, the home. It recognized its mate. A small, genuine smile touched her lips, watery but real. I believe you owe me a bouquet of wildflowers, Your Majesty. Callum chuckled, the sound a low, happy rumble in his chest, relief and joy flooding through him. I believe I do, my love. And a library full of books, and a lifetime of honey cakes, and every sunrise and sunset for the rest of our immortal lives. He helped her to her feet, his hands lingering at her waist, reluctant to let her go even for a moment. The chasm between them was gone, replaced by a connection so strong, so vibrant, it was a living thing, a golden thread that bound their souls together. The rebuilding began not with grand declarations, but with quiet moments, with patience and tenderness. That night, he took her back to her rooms and stayed with her, platonically, just holding her while she slept, watching over her like the guardian he'd always wanted to be. She asked him to tell her everything, and he did. He recounted the month before she arrived, how he'd stared at her portrait for hours, how his wolf had reacted with such certainty. I memorized your favorite constellation, he confessed. I learned to make honey cake myself, burning 3 batches before I got it right. I read every book you loved, took notes in the margins. Why? She whispered, tears in her eyes again. But these were different. These were healing tears. Because I was already half in love with you before we met, he said simply. And I fell the rest of the way the moment you lifted your chin in defiance in my throne room. The next morning brought awkwardness and uncertainty. What are we now? She asked over breakfast. Whatever you need us to be, he said. I will court you again, properly. I will earn your trust, rebuild what I broke. You're a king, she said with a watery laugh. You don't have to earn anything. With you, I'm just a male, he said softly. And you're my mate. You don't owe me anything. Everything must be your choice. They fell into new rhythms, morning walks where they talked about everything and nothing, shared meals where comfortable silence was as valuable as conversation, evenings in the library where they would read together, her leaning against his shoulder, his arm around her waist. Physical affection grew slowly, carefully. He held her hand. She leaned into his warmth. He brushed her hair one evening, his fingers gentle and reverent, and she nearly wept at the tenderness of it. They talked about hopes and fears and dreams. She told him about her mother's death, about the loneliness of growing up believing she was worthless. He told her about the weight of the crown, about the isolation of power, about the years of ruling alone and wondering if he would ever find his mate. One night, she fell asleep while he was reading to her. He carried her to bed, tucked her in, and stayed to watch her sleep, marveling at the trust it represented. A week into their reconciliation, they were sparring in the training yard. She'd asked him to teach her to fight, to make her stronger. It turned into wrestling, laughter, and breathless exertion, and ended with him pinning her to the mat, both of them breathing hard, his body covering hers. The charged eye contact held for a long moment. Rosalind, he breathed, his voice rough with want. She reached up and pulled him down into a kiss, slower this time, exploring, learning each other. When he pulled back, his eyes were dark. I don't want to rush you, he said. I'm not made of glass, she said, frustrated by his restraint. No, he agreed, pressing a kiss to her forehead. You're made of starlight and steel, and you deserve to be cherished, courted properly, not rushed. But there was still one thing broken, one wound that needed healing. I can't shift, she confessed one night, her voice small. I've never been able to. Maybe they're right. Maybe I am broken. You are not broken, he said fiercely. Your wolf is wounded, wounded by years of being told she was worthless. But wounds can heal. Let me help you. How? He took her to the sacred grove, the place where the first alphas had come to commune with the moon. Try, he encouraged. I'm here. You're safe. She tried. She reached inward, called to her wolf, and felt nothing. The failure was devastating. "I can't," she sobbed. "Maybe they're right. Maybe I really am." "No," he said, pulling her close. "Wounds take time to heal. We'll try again, as many times as it takes." And they did. Every day for 2 weeks they worked together. He would shift, letting her touch his wolf form, building trust. They would run together in human form, building confidence. She would meditate, trying to connect with the dormant part of herself. There were moments of frustration. "I can feel her, but there's still a wall, something blocking me." "Your father's voice," Callum said gently. "His words built that wall. We have to tear it down, brick by brick." They worked on it. Every time she heard her father's voice in her head calling her worthless, Callum would counter it. "You are strong. You are worthy. You are loved." And slowly, something began to shift. One evening she howled in frustration, a human sound, and to her shock, her wolf howled back from deep inside. The wall had cracked. "She's there," she gasped. "She's really there." The night of the full moon, 3 weeks after their reconciliation, they returned to the grove. "I'm ready," she said. "I can feel her. She's ready too." Callum shifted into his massive silver wolf and waited, patient and encouraging. Rosalind closed her eyes, reached inward, and called to her wolf. Not with desperation, but with acceptance, with love, with the knowledge that she was worthy. And this time, her wolf answered. The shift was painful, violent, bones cracking and reforming. But this time, she didn't fight it. This time, she embraced it. When she opened her eyes, the world was different, sharper, brighter. She looked down and saw paws covered in rich sable fur. She lifted her head, and a sound tore from her throat that she'd never made before. A howl, clear and strong, a declaration to the moon and the world that she was finally whole. Callum answered with a howl of his own, joyous and resonant. He trotted to her, and they nuzzled, a pure expression of love and belonging. That night they ran. 2 wolves, silver and sable, side by side under the moon, their bodies moving in perfect synchrony. When they shifted back, both naked and laughing under the stars, he looked at her with such love it took her breath away. "You did it," he said. "We did it," she corrected. He pulled her close, and she felt him restraining himself even now, his body trembling with want but holding back. "When we mate," he said, his voice rough, "it will be because you ask me, not because the bond demands it. I want you to choose me fully, freely." She kissed him deeply, pouring all her love and trust into it. "I already have," she whispered, but she understood what he was saying. There was still one more battle to fight, the council. The next morning, Callum received word. Elder Thane had called an emergency council session. He was bringing formal charges, demanding the betrothal be annulled. Rosalind, who had been with Callum when the message arrived, felt panic claw at her throat. "They'll take me away from you," she gasped. Callum pulled her close, fierce and possessive. "Never. They would have to kill me first. But we must face them together. Will you stand with me?" She straightened, feeling her wolf stir with determination. "Always." They entered the great hall together, her hand in his, to face the full council. Elder Thane stood at the center, his face smug. The other conquered alphas who made up the council looked grim. "Your Majesty," Elder Thane began, his voice ringing with false concern. "We have come to a difficult decision. For the good of the realm, we must insist the betrothal to the Northridge Omega be annulled. She is unfit." "On what grounds?" Callum asked, his voice dangerously calm. "She is wolfless, incapable of shifting," Elder Thane said. "Her father deceived us. The healers confirmed it. She brings shame to your crown and weakness to our alliance. The rogue attacks continue, proving that this union projects vulnerability. We have found a more suitable match, the daughter of—" "Enough," Callum said, his alpha power flooding the room, making every wolf there want to bare their throats. You dare presume to choose my mate for me? We presume to save the kingdom from your foolish— Careful, Callum growled, his eyes flashing pure gold. You are speaking of your Luna. She is no Luna, Elder Thane spat. She is a wolfless Omega who cannot even— I can shift, Rosalind said, her voice cutting through the hall. Every head turned to her. She stepped forward, leaving Callum's side, claiming her own space. You say the moon goddess rejected me? She let her eyes flash wolf gray, let them see the truth. The hall erupted in shocked murmurs. Elder Thane's face went pale. Impossible. The healers said— I was wounded, Rosalind said, finding her voice, finding her strength. There's a difference between broken and wounded, between lost and dormant. I shifted under the full moon. I am no longer the Omega who arrived here. I am becoming the Luna this pack needs. Callum moved to stand beside her, taking her hand. You want to know the real reason I chose her? He said, his voice carrying to every corner of the hall. Not the strategic reasons I gave you before. He looked directly at Elder Thane. She is my fated mate. The moon goddess herself chose her for me. The hall erupted in uproar. A convenient claim, Elder Thane sneered, made only now that— Callum's alpha power exploded outward, forcing every wolf in the room to their knees. Every wolf except Rosalind, who stood at his side, untouched. Are you calling your king a liar? Callum said, his voice deadly soft. Elder Thane's head was bowed, his throat bared in submission. No, Majesty. She is my mate, Callum said. My fated one, my chosen. The moon goddess made this choice, not me. To challenge her is to challenge divine will. This matter is closed. But Rosalind stepped forward again. I have something to say. The hall went silent. She looked at the council, at the wolves who had dismissed her, judged her, found her wanting. I came here a pawn, she said. I believed that's all I could be, because that's all I'd been taught to believe. My father sold me. You judged me. But she looked at Callum with love shining in her eyes. He showed me I was wrong. He showed me I could be more. She turned back to the council. I may have been born an Omega, but I am your Luna now, and I will earn that title every day. I will not cower from your judgment or beg for your approval. I will stand beside your king and serve this pack with everything I have. The strength in her voice, the steel in her spine, won them over. Even some of the resistant elders nodded with grudging respect. But before anyone could respond, alarms sounded, bells ringing, shouts from the battlements. Rogues! A guard shouted, bursting into the hall. A massive, coordinated attack on the northern border! They're breaking through! The council erupted into chaos. Callum was already moving, his military mind taking over, barking orders. But Rosalind felt something else. A pull, an instinct she'd never felt before. Her wolf surged forward, not with aggression, but with purpose. I can help, she said. Callum turned to her, torn between protecting her and trusting her. How? My bloodline, she said. The wards. I can feel them, Callum. Broken, dormant, but still there in the land. I think I can wake them. It was a guess, an instinct, but her wolf was certain. He searched her face, then nodded. Show me. They ran to the battlements together, the council following. In the distance, they could see the rogue army, larger than any they'd faced, surging towards the castle. Rosalind closed her eyes, reached inward, and this time, instead of calling to her wolf, she called to something deeper. To the ancient magic in her blood, the gift of the first Omegas. And it answered. She shifted into her sable wolf and threw her head back, howling. But this howl was different. It carried power, ancient magic that resonated through the land itself. As her howl echoed across the valley, shimmering light began to appear at the borders. Wards, protective barriers woven from moonlight and old magic, rising from the ground where they had slept for generations. They spread outward in a glowing web, covering the entire territory, and when the rogues hit them, they were repelled, thrown back with yelps of pain. The attack faltered, then broke completely, the rogues fleeing. The council watched in stunned silence. Then, one by one, they fell to their knees. Not in submission, but in reverence. She had just saved them all. She shifted back, swaying with exhaustion, and Callum caught her, pulling her close. "You're not just Luna by title," he whispered in awe. "You're Luna by power." The council, even Elder Thane, bowed their heads in respect. There could be no more argument. She had proven herself beyond any doubt. That night, after the council had dispersed and the castle had settled, they were finally alone in his chambers. She had asked to go there, not to her rooms. Exhausted and exhilarated, they stood facing each other. "You were magnificent today," he said softly. "I was terrified," she admitted. "You didn't show it. You stood before them like you were born to rule. You saved us all." He reached for her, pulling her close. "Thank you," he whispered, "for trusting me, for choosing me." She looked up at him, her heart full. "I choose you," she said. "Before the moon goddess, before fate, before everything. I choose you, Callum." He kissed her then, deep and claiming, and this time there was no restraint. This time they came together as mates, as equals, as two halves of one soul finally whole. When the mating bond snapped fully into place, it was like golden fire in their veins, burning away every doubt, every fear, every moment of pain. It was unbreakable, eternal, perfect. They were bound, heart and soul, forever. 1 month later, Rosalind stood in the Great Hall, watching as she mediated a dispute between two pack members. She listened to both sides, found a solution that honored both wolves, and sent them away satisfied. Callum watched from the shadows, his heart swelling with pride. Later in their chambers, he told her, "You're a natural." "I'm still learning," she admitted, "still scared sometimes." "That's what makes you a good leader," he said, echoing the words from the old book. "You listen to the quietest whispers." She smiled, then grew more serious. "My father wants to visit. He wants forgiveness." Callum's expression darkened. "You owe him nothing." "I know," she said, "but I need to face him, to show him I'm not his pawn anymore. Will you stand with me?" "Always." When Alpha Vance arrived 3 months later, he expected to find the timid daughter he'd sold. Instead, he found a Luna, regal and powerful, her wolf's eyes flashing with confidence. In a private audience, he tried to take credit. "I always knew you'd be great," he said. "You taught me I was worthless," Rosalind said calmly. "You were wrong." "I gave you a kingdom," he protested. "No," she said. "You sold me. He chose me. There's a difference." She looked at the man who had broken her for so many years and felt nothing but pity. "I don't need your approval anymore. I never did." She turned to leave, Callum at her side, and didn't look back. That evening, as the sun set over the valley, they stood on the battlements together, his arms wrapped around her from behind. "Regrets?" he asked softly. She leaned back into him, breathing in his scent, feeling the steady beat of his heart. Not a single one. They shifted together, two wolves running through their territory under the rising moon. Her howl joined his, strong and clear and free.